Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we are in the 6th chapter, 11th chapter of the Gita. And we're not super far along, but we've gotten into it a bit. The connection between the 11th chapter and the 10th is important to note. Something that we should all have committed to memory. In the 10th chapter, Arjuna has a desire to understand how Krishna is manifested in the world. There's value in that. Somebody's trying to coax me into having a debate with a Christian. Devotee's trying to coax me into having a debate with a Christian on YouTube. And so we talked, we're discussing, if you want to have a proper debate, you have a proposition. Each one of you takes a side. So, the proposition could be, whatever. Anandani's Varangi's hairband is ugly. And so, Kat could be like, yeah, I think it's ugly. And Shri could be like, no, I think it's beautiful. You follow? So you have a proposition, and then everybody commits to one side of the proposition. That's like a formal debate. That's how it goes. Generally, when you argue with people on the street, you don't even know what your proposition is. You're just arguing about some nonsense. Everybody's got a million escape hatches in case you start to win the debate. And nobody even knows what they're talking about. And half an hour or 45 minutes goes by. You're constantly asking yourself, what are we even talking about? What are we even arguing about? And it becomes, you're just sort of exchanging barbs. It's how uneducated people converse and argue. Amongst educated people, you figure out what the proposition is that's being debated. And if your partner starts to get caught in the weeds, if your interlocutor, your debate partner, starts to get caught in the weeds and go off into uncharted territory, you'll say, that's not what we're discussing. And you'll refuse to entertain it. You'll force him to stick to the proposition. You follow? So, in general, in life, you should know what you're discussing with people and what the proposition at stake is, even if it's informally done. Even if you don't formally state it, you should just always know what's at stake and what you're discussing. Because if you don't, you're just sort of waddling through life aimlessly. Does that make sense? And so, in a formal debate, you actually decide, this is the proposition we're discussing. And then the next thing you decide is, which side you're on, that's correct. What's the proposition, which side you're on? And the next thing after discussing the proposition and picking sides, what's the next thing you discuss? You decide on, you agree to? Do not answer, Nick. Anybody else?
Unstated premises?
Unstated premises, no, that's just what you figure out in the debate to defeat your opponent by calling them out on their unstated premises and then finding fault with them. Generally speaking, nobody is actually a poor logician. Nobody says, all birds have wings, and eagles have wings, therefore, pigs can fly. Generally speaking, people don't do that. You follow? Generally speaking, people don't make grotesque errors. There were 2 mistakes made in that, by the way. All birds have wings, but not only birds have wings. Eagles have wings. Therefore, you can't conclude that eagles are birds, because all birds have wings, but other animals might have wings too. You don't know. You haven't set that up. Now, if eagles didn't have wings, you could conclude that they weren't birds. But if eagles, it's modus tollens. But if eagles do have wings, you can't conclude that they are birds. And then, but if I further go, pigs can fly, that has nothing to do with either the major premise, all birds have wings, or the minor premise, that eagles have wings. That kind of non sequitur logic is generally for people with some sort of schizoid disorder. That kind of word salad thinking. A lot of people will make the mistake all birds have wings, eagles have wings, therefore they're birds. A lot of people will make that mistake because it's a little slight nuance. All birds have wings, eagles have wings, so therefore eagles are birds. Does that make sense? Why doesn't it make sense?
Because not only birds have wings.
There you go. See that? You got to get trained. And you got to remember it. And then when you read newspaper articles, especially if you read newspaper articles written by people who are politically biased, either right or left, you'll spot all sorts of just horrible, horrible logic. These kind of mistakes. Just egregious mistakes that would like not even get you through like a first semester logic course at a community college. But those ones are, at least they appear to be true, prima facie, for an ignorant person. But sometimes you meet people who will be like, only reptiles have shells, turtles have shells, and therefore the sky is blue. You will meet people like that in your life. Those people are genuinely mentally disturbed. They genuinely, like, the information kind of doesn't process properly through their brains. They have some kind of schizoid disorder. And they have the word salad that comes out from schizophrenic's mouth, which is kind of a defining feature of someone who has a psychotic break or someone who's like undergoing some sort of schizoaffective moment. That word salad is indicative of a mental word salad. Things don't process properly. They're almost like dyslexic in their thoughts. Do you guys follow this? Instead of transposing letters and numbers, they transpose ideas and concepts. Get lost in their head. There's other things that crazy people do. They think you can read their mind, and so they talk to you in this intimate way as if you're already in their head, and like the two of you share secrets that the rest of the world doesn't have. That's also like a big red flag. Somebody does that with you, don't marry them. It's the beginning of the end. Who do we know that does that? You do that. Who does it the worst of anybody in the room? Shri. She's the worst at it. So, yeah, there it is. Stuff we have to extirpate from your personality so you can move forward in life and be successful in relationships. So anyway, most people don't have these kind of, fortunately for Shri, she's super smart. So when she gets called out on this weird little 3-year-old tendency she has, she feels embarrassed. And so I just do it publicly to shame her. Make it less likely to happen in the future. You got to be careful about getting too close to people who have these kind of major cognitive disorders. It's dangerous. There's other stuff that's just as dangerous. Duplicit people, dishonest people. Those people got to be avoided like the plague too. So this isn't the only list. But the problem with the crazy people is they can sincerely, totally ruin your life. And like they're totally sincere about it. Like they're just like, they think that they're doing the right thing. They're driving you off a cliff and they're super sincere about it. At least with duplicit people, somewhere in there they know that they're being duplicit. There's some hope for them. It's kind of a 50-50 thing. The crazy people are sincere, so if you can straighten out their craziness, you follow? Then there's hope for them. Duplicit people, there's almost no hope for them because they're willfully duplicit. They have to undergo some kind of major life event. Yeah. There's other real bad stuff. Ingratitude is an awful one. Gratitude is the mother of all good qualities. Gratitude is the mother of all good qualities. And ingratitude is the father of every bad thing in the world. The inability to look at the world and find things to be grateful for. Find things that make you responsible. When you're grateful, it means you feel that some good has been done for you above and beyond what you just deserved. It's the opposite of entitlement. And so when you're grateful, you become responsible because you look at the world and the people in your life and the people in the world and you feel voluntarily indebted to them for the good things they've done to you that go beyond what you deserved. And therefore you become automatically responsible and faithful to them. You follow? If you lack that gratitude, then you go through the world a narcissist, a functional narcissist, entitled, taking things for granted, taking people for granted, and never feeling a sense of responsibility and voluntary indebtedness to others that brings out the best in you. Altruism, philanthropy, altruism, etc., etc. Compassion. Anyway, that's probably my trifecta. Avoid ungrateful people, avoid duplicit people, and avoid crazy people. For lack of a more specific term. I explained what I meant when I said that. Fortunately, the word crazy hasn't been tagged by the anti-ableist movement, and so you can still use it. You guys familiar with ableism? If you're not, Google it. Ableism. The belief if you call people stupid, you're offending stupid people all over the world, and you're showing bias towards people who are able-bodied and able-minded, and you have to be really careful. And not just, you can't call people crippled or what have you, but even if people are foolish, you have to find very, very careful language to describe it, because they might actually be foolish and then you're discriminating against them. So I think crazy is still off the ableist list, at least temporarily. We'll see what 2022 brings. But I think I'm good for the rest of the year. And so we can say avoid crazy people like the plague. Of course, now I'm also critiquing people who've suffered the plague. So you can really, you can really, really take you can kind of go ad absurdum. You can go to the point of view of absurdity with this kind of stuff. For the record, idiots are people who have an IQ between 0 and 25. And imbeciles have an IQ between, I believe it's 26 and 40 or 50. And then 50 to 70 is morons. And so all those people are considered to be mentally retarded. So anything below a 70 IQ is technically mentally retarded. And those are specific medical terms for people, Of course, 0 to 25, you're practically speaking like in a vegetative state. It's like a very, very low level of consciousness. People with a 70 IQ, very feeble-minded people. Anyway, so yeah, avoid ungrateful people like the plague. Like people with COVID, avoid them. And so avoid ungrateful people, avoid duplicit people, and avoid crazy people. Generally speaking, most people you meet on the street are not crazy. They won't make grotesque, logical non sequiturs. They will times fall into all birds have wings, eagles have wings, therefore eagles are birds. Sometimes there's seductive fallacies that people make because they don't learn to slow down and catch it, and they glide through. It's actually the result of our intelligence to some extent, because we recognize patterns and we go through stuff over and over again. It's why people are susceptible to optical illusions, because you recognize patterns, and therefore your mind always sees the pattern even when the photo doesn't have the pattern. You see the checkers, and then there's an interruption to that, and you just see the checkers anyway, because your mind can't not see it. You follow? This kind of stuff happens. And so we're susceptible to various types of optical and cognitive illusions, precisely because our minds are so good at recognizing patterns, which are extremely important for survival. And so because of that, you do sort of a shorthand. Like we don't read. You ever see that on Facebook? It says, if you can read this and you're like super intelligent, and it has all the words with the letters mixed up in each individual word. It's not true. Anybody can read it. Nobody cannot read that. It's super easy to read because we don't read letters. We read entire words. And therefore, if the letters are messed up, it doesn't matter because we can scramble them. You get like an 8-letter word, it starts to get a little funky. But with 2, 3, 4, 5-letter words, everybody can unscramble them. Just automatically, it's easy. Anyway, anyone who's fluent in the language. So they're just lying to you. They're trying to make you feel special to market things to you. It's funny, they tell you you're special, but they're actually playing on your vanity and your stupidity, that you'll fall for that in order to then click on the link and then they'll sell you something. Do you follow this? So, most people don't make grotesque logical fallacies. Anyway, in a debate, the next thing is not unstated premises, which are the types of groupthink and plausibility structures and just gliding through life without examining it that most people go through. That stuff's common. The next thing in a formal debate that you have to decide on once you figure out what your proposition is and what side you're on is what?
What good evidence looks like?
What good evidence looks like. There you go. What good evidence looks like. Double-blind studies, epidemiology, if you're into medicine, if you're looking at something medicinal. But, the different things will stand as evidence in different debates. So anyway, they want me to debate with this Christian, and I said, why don't we debate on whether the atonement of Jesus, that's the crucifixion of Jesus, the suffering of Jesus on the cross, the blood sacrificed by Jesus on the cross, the atonement, was necessary for the redemption, that's getting rid of your sins, and salvation, that's being exalted. Sometimes redemption is used a little differently to mean that you actually go back to heaven. But if you look at like serious Catholic theology, then it's redemption, everybody's redeemed, and then salvation is for the few, the proud, the Marines. It's for the people who actually voluntarily surrender their lives to Christ, accept Him as their Lord and Savior. So I said, let's debate on whether the idea that Jesus and His suffering on the cross, ergo the atonement, was necessary for the redemption and or salvation of the world. Did you guys follow this? Did Jesus have to die on the cross in order for the world to be saved? And I said, and I'll argue that that idea is incoherent and inconsistent with an all-good and all-powerful God. And the guy said, no, I don't argue that. He specifically said, I don't want to argue that. I'd rather argue something with greater implications for Christianity. He literally said this. His exact quote was, I don't think I'm interested in defending the mere logical coherence of Christian exclusivism. I'd want to debate something with greater implications, where a compelling case would also be a compelling case for Christianity. My response to that was, I'm a bit dumbfounded. What has greater implications than an attack on the very logic of the entire linchpin of Christianity, namely that Jesus' blood sacrifice atonement is essential for the redemption and or salvation of the world? What intellectually astute Christian wouldn't be champing at the bit to debate that? It's everything for them, and the portal through which their whole religion passes. Did you follow? There is nothing with greater implications. That's your whole shebang. That's it. Then from my side, I'd love it if somebody said to me, I'd like you to demonstrate that Krishna consciousness with all its bells and whistles. You follow? is consistent with an all-good and all-powerful God. I'd love that. That's easy. Forget my core ideas. I can even show you that Krishna playing a flute is consistent with an all-good and all-powerful deity. He's attracting you instead of making you afraid of him. He's not holding weapons which create fear. He's not ruling over you with a scepter or a lightning bolt. He's playing a flute to attract you, which is indicative of God as a lover instead of God as a ruler. It's consistent with an all-good deity. The peacock feather Krishna wears in his head, picked up from the forest floor, because peacock feathers are just free. They're just on the forest floor. They drop around. Shows that Krishna is a subversive deity, an unassuming deity, a pastoral deity, really a divine Cupid, if you want to really look at it objectively speaking. Your best friend, available, simple, uncomplicated. All things that I think go hand in hand with God being all good. So if I just had to, I'm ready to debate attacks against spirituality in general, combined with anything you can throw at me against my actual belief system. But if you told me all I had to do was just defend the logic and coherence of my core tenet, you follow? I mean, the fact you wouldn't debate me on that is the proof that Christianity, as it's conceived of by 99% of the people in the world, is unworkable. It's a common thing amongst Christian theologians, serious Christian theologians who engage in academic debate, that they will refuse to argue Christian theology. They will argue generic theism, because the Christian deity is too difficult to defend. Alternatively, if I argue generic theism, I can't wait to win that debate so I can share with you the even better. The only reason I will argue generic theism is because I think that people are too foolish to actually understand the very, very high and profound idea of Krishna. And so I need to teach them the alphabet and the A, B's, and C's of spirituality before they can appreciate the really beautiful poetry that is Krishna. I have to teach them basic grammar before they can appreciate the poetic alliteration that is Krishna. You know? To be or not to be, that is the question. It's like, that's a profound statement. But it doesn't, it doesn't begin with a subject. You know what I mean? I don't know if it's perfectly composed from a grade school grammar point of view. To be or not to be. There's no obvious subject. I guess beingness is the subject, but it's not stated overtly. So you could imagine a child who's just beginning to study grammar finding problems with that statement. You follow? Does that make sense? I don't know if there's a period after not to be, period. Seems like there should be. That is the question. The question is to exist or not to exist. But to be or not to be, it doesn't really flow. It's like actually a little bit off kilter from just a really low-level grade school grammatical point of view. But it's purposely done. It's poetic. His anger was volcanic. Some kid might be bewildered. They might be trying to figure out what does it mean? Like he gets angry and lava explodes from his forehead or something like that. What exactly does that mean? Because they haven't learned the use of metaphor yet. So the only reason why I would debate generic theism is because the person I was talking to wasn't evolved enough to really appreciate Krishna yet, and I had to warm them up and grow them up in order so they could appreciate Krishna. Not because I got to hide my God in the closet like some sort of redheaded stepchild because I'm ashamed of them. I was probably bigoted against redheaded people and stepchildren and children. So anyway, it's very reasonable that Arjuna would want to understand how to find God in this world, because God's abstract. I, generally speaking, don't need my scriptures. Another thing, he said, can I use the Bible as evidence? I'm like, no, of course you can't use the Bible as evidence. Are you kidding me? He tried that one on me too. Of course you can't use the Bible as evidence. I swapped it out to that it's coherent and logically compatible with an all-good, all-powerful deity. I try to introduce another standard of evidence. You follow? He was like, I can't debate that point unless you accept the Bible. I was like, that's ridiculous. I'm like, what kind of person are you? Like, if you say that the core of my belief system, because something said in a book, what if it tells in your book to kill all the children? Well, I can't debate the logic of that unless you're willing to accept what it says in my book. That's insane. Like what's wrong with you? It's like deeply worrisome. Then the devotee was like, well, we can't prove everything without our books. I'm like, yes, I can. And he's like, well, prove that Krishna wears a peacock feather. And I'm like, wait a second. You're comparing the linchpin, the entirety of Christianity, like their whole enchilada, to a detail from our tradition. That's ridiculous. I don't think you need to know that Krishna wears a peacock feather to go back to heaven. It's not a core item of our philosophy. It's an accoutrement. It's a detail. It's a beautiful detail that's consistent, and I gave the same argument I just gave to you guys. I go, but it's a detail nonetheless. It's not a core tenet of our faith. What to speak of it's not a core tenet, what to speak of the core tenet. It's not the fulcrum on which our entire philosophy hinges. You're comparing the smallest of details with their core idea. You follow? And I can certainly show how it's logical and coherent. You follow? But Krishna doesn't wear a peacock feather in every incarnation. Not everybody who goes back to heaven has to see Krishna in a peacock feather. All the worshippers of Vishnu don't get to see Krishna with a peacock feather. It's for our particular sect of people who are attracted to this idea of this very, very beautiful Indic Cupid, divine Cupid. And honestly, I don't even think it's essential for that. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wasn't always wearing a peacock feather. And he's Krishna. Even Krishna himself doesn't always wear a peacock feather. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu isn't an avatar. He's avatari in our tradition. So anyway, I was like, I can easily argue that point. So number one, you're comparing a detail of the whole thing. And number two, I feel really comfortable explaining how that's reasonable. But our tradition doesn't say it's absolutely essential, and unless you accept this, you'll die in a lake of fire. Burn forever, conscious suffering, or suffer fundamental annihilation. Some Christians say you're fundamentally annihilated. You cease to exist. That's hell. Others say you suffer in perpetuity, but some Christians have decided that's too much. So we're going to go for the annihilationist perspective. It's more defensible. These ideas I bring up as a critique of Christianity, they show up all over the place. They're big issues that are grappled with, largely unsuccessfully. But yeah, Arjuna is saying to Krishna, I want to see you in this world. Tell me how I can do it. And Krishna says, yeah, you can look at the world, anything you see that's beautiful or powerful or striking or wonder-striking or amazing, you should see that as being a little spark of my splendor. And let me give you 70 examples to help you. The taste of water, the smell of the earth, the light of the sun, the Himalayas amongst mountains, Beautiful ideas, a beautiful legend. Like in a map, a legend allows you to look at the map and make sense of it. A legend to look at the world through that will allow you to see how everything is woven together and makes sense. And then, that's the 10th chapter. And then the 11th chapter, Arjuna says, can I actually see it? Not just theoretically, I want to experience it. And that's a move from an intellectually astute, logical, coherent understanding to an actual experience of divinity. Now, it might seem like I waxed eloquent and went way off target with my big, long tangent. But get ready, guys. Buckle up, Buttercup. Here it comes. I think it is necessary to move from a logical, reasonable, intellectually astute theology so you're not murdering children because God told me to. There's a band called Dr. No I listened to as a kid. There's a song called, an album called Plug in Jesus. And there's a song on that album called God Told Me To. And it says, in my room a dog lies dead, a crucifix pounded through his head. I hung him high to drain his blood. God told me that I should. Blood and should don't quite rhyme. He wasn't the best lyricist in the world, but he worked with what he had. Pieces of grandma litter the den. God, please don't let me kill again. Please whisper to me no more. Another will fight your holy war. God told me to, God told me to, God told me to, so it must be right. This subversive punk rock singer from the 80s was, as a 20-something-year-old, singing about how people come up with these really bad ideas. Drowning witches, trial by suffering, crusades, pogroms, essentially genocidal acts in the name of, spreading the word. And so this inability to link what you're doing to logic and reason, and the feeling that you don't need to, is the genesis of all religious crime. Because if everybody is forced to logically explain what they believe without just quoting their book, then all this stuff wouldn't be sustainable. It wouldn't be enactable. It wouldn't be executable. It would fail on the table of justice before it ever got off the ground. Did you guys follow this? So Arjuna starts by asking Krishna to link himself intellectually, logically, reasonably to this world in some sort of a very sophisticated, very cool skala natari, a natural order, showing how things are connected in hierarchies, sacred orders, sacred natural orders, and things are all connected together in some great chain of being, in some great tapestry of reality, with God being the way and the weft that ties everything together. You guys following this? Once that's satisfied, Arjuna can then legitimately ask, show it to me. But asking for the vision of transcendence without having a reasonable understanding of divinity is dangerous. Because then God tells you to do all sorts of horrible things, and you just listen to the voices in your head like a schizophrenic and do all sorts of awful stuff because you've lost your ability to reason. Galileo said, I can't believe that a God who gave to me the ability to think and reason would expect me to have to reject that in order to understand him. When you look at something, if you look at a child, then by looking at a child, you understand something about their parents. Genetically, temperamentally. You judge a tree by its fruit because they're connected. If you want to look at what caused the universe, you look for what's in the universe. What do we find in the universe? We find order. We find logic. We find fundamental laws governing fundamental particles that follow law and order. Some of that logic may be fuzzy, like things like quantum leaps and stuff like that, but there is a system. You can map it. It makes sense. Therefore, if you're looking for the cause of the universe, it should also be reasonable and logical, because when you look at the child of whatever created this universe, that's the universe, you find logic and coherence everywhere you look. Therefore, the most reasonable explanation for the source of this world would also involve these fundamental patterns, these fundamental laws, these fundamental rules, because that's what's here in the byproduct or the child, so it must have come from the parent. Did you guys follow this? Did you follow this? It's a good argument. It's a strong argument. You base on the known, you work your way to the unknown, you extrapolate to the unknown. There's no better way to do it. If you can't just quote your text, there's no better way to do it. And if you can't quote your text, don't do this. Now, if you believe that God came, God was the source of everything, then that God must also be logical, although translogical. You follow? That God must be reasonable and logical and coherent. Do you guys follow this? Therefore, if you want to experience divinity, you must move through coherence and logic. Therefore, God becomes translogical, not illogical. And therefore, we can reasonably ask everybody, ourselves included, to pass through the gates of logic on our way to the kingdom of transcendence. And Krishna does precisely that in the 10th chapter. Once that's satisfied, you can then ask to experience divinity, and your experience of divinity will not be dangerous and unhinged and chaotic and volatile and potentially evil and distheistic. The journey that Arjuna takes sets a beautiful example for us. And interestingly, just today, I experienced somebody who's professing, he's like an intellectual in his tradition. So he's like, one, like, wow, 0.1% or something like that of Christians are really like serious intellectuals. He's that, and he can't even argue. He doesn't even want to try to argue the core tenet of his faith. That's dangerous. That's really dangerous. We need to avoid that. We need to think through our understanding of divinity such that without ever referring to our text, we can explain the reasonability, the intellectual astuteness, the coherence, the logic of our understanding. And then the scriptures become this beautiful accoutrement that stands on logic and then takes you a little further. Today, are you going to respond to what I said?
I don't have anything more valuable to add, Prabhu. I agree with everything you said. It was beautiful.
You followed, right? I haven't made this exact argument to you before. I thought you'd appreciate it. By looking at the universe, we find order and reason and hierarchy and laws, and therefore we should understand that the deity must also be just. And whatever the sources, must contain those same elements, should contain those same elements, would most reasonably contain those same elements. Okay. And then Krishna says to Arjuna, you can't see it. I got to give you divine eyes. And he gives Arjuna this divya chakshush. And then Arjuna is able to see the entire universe in one place at one time. Past, present, future, everything that's ever existed in one place at one time. Just wrap your head around that. And that's the universal form. That's God as the universe. And it's an Indic thing. It just shows up. It goes back all the way to the Purusha Sukta and the hymn to the giant, the hymn to the creator of the universe, from the oldest of Vedic texts, the Rig Veda. And you find that same Purusha Sukta is repeated in the Bhagavatam, for instance, and in the Upanishads it's repeated. And it kind of like works its way through all the stratum of Vedic literature again and again. In the Mahabharata, Arjuna sees even Duryodhana sees there's several visions of the universal form that take place. This happens regularly in the Vedic revelation over millennium through all stratum of Vedic literatures. This same understanding that the world was created from God and that God's everywhere. The mountains are his bones, the rivers are his veins, the oceans are his semen. Sounds super gross, but semen, has like a really kind of nasty ring to it in English. Sperm, semen, it sounds really nasty in English. Those terms are not considered to be appropriate for civilized discourse, unless you're like a biology student or something like that. But in Sanskrit, the terms don't have that negative connotation. It's weird, Like in Victorian society, like the nape of the neck was considered to be this like heavily erogenous zone, and women had to cover the nape of their neck. This little section here. That's why I always wear my jacket zipped up. And so I don't want to agitate y'all. So, at various times and places that like different things are considered to be, erogenous and inappropriate. And so somehow, for whatever reason, these substances are considered to be nasty and noxious and like I said, uncivilized. I tend to think the Indian people seem to, from what I can see, they seem to have a more positive relationship with sex than the residue of like a really oppressive Victorian kind of Christian ethos, where people are getting circumcised to give them pain when they're young, so they'll associate pain with their genitalia. It seems like these Jewish, Islamic, Christian traditions have some real macabre stuff, which makes perfect sense. I mean, their whole conception is that their deity was crucified as a blood sacrifice on an altar, and then they consume the body of their deity daily as the Eucharist, even wear talismans of it around their neck. It's a kind of a cannibal blood cult. Like if you were an alien and you showed up here and you're like, what's going on here? Like, we like to have a picture of our God dying on a cross and suffering. We meditate on his suffering until the wounds appear on us. And then we drink his blood every day and we eat his body like ritually. And that's like our core thing that we do at our church. We turn this wafer and this grape juice into the body and blood of Christ so we can, ritually, cannibalistically consume it. And so the idea of pain and suffering, and it's like everywhere, and it's like, what's all about? Sure, makes sense. But like a name for Vishnu is Vishvareta, universal semen. Shukra, Reta, these different terms, they don't have a negative meaning in Sanskrit. They're used in a positive way. And so, as much as it's Krishna's blood is the creative waters of the universe. You know what I mean? It's like it's Vishnu sweats, and that becomes the ocean in which he lies, the causal ocean. These things, like they don't translate really well, but in the original language, they're quite beautiful and poetic, and it's representative of a culture of people that didn't have the same exact moralistic tendencies that we do. It's more body positive. Do you guys follow that? So these types of images where God is the universe, the universe comes from God, where the universe is inexorably connected to God, they abound. And then Arjuna not just wanted to hear about it, understand it logically, but eventually he wanted to see it. And then we get this beautiful verse that if thousands of suns rose at once, that's what Arjuna, that might help you understand the radiance of that divine being, where everything could be seen in one place at one time that ever existed in creation, based on what you want to see. You could imagine that, right? Logically, you might not be able to logically actually envision it, but you can at least logically conceive of such a thing. And it's like, wow, that would be amazing. Yeah, sure, God should be able to show you that. If God's ultimately the way and the wealth of the universe, then yeah, tapping into that matrix should allow you to see everything. And now it brings us to text 13. At that time, Arjuna could see the universal form of the Lord, in the universal form of the Lord, the unlimited expansions of the universe, situated in one place, although divided into many, many thousands. Didn't he just say that in the earlier verse? He did. He said, whatever you wish to see, behold at once in this body of mine. This universal form can show you whatever you desire to see, whatever you may want to see in the future, everything moving and non-moving, completely in one place. So he says he's going to show it to him, and then here he shows it to him. Do you follow? He said he was going to show it to him, and then he shows it to him. Does that make sense? Cool, right? Then, bewildered and astonished, his hair standing on end, Arjuna bowed his head to offer obeisances, and with folded hands began to pray the Supreme Lord. So the result of such a beatific vision, to use Christian theological language, the result of such a vision of transcendence is that Arjuna became overwhelmed with emotion. His hair stood on end. He became thrilled, and he prayed. And Arjuna says, my dear Lord Krishna, I see assembled in your body all the demigods and various living entities. I see Brahma sitting on the lotus flower, as well as Lord Shiva and all the sages and divine serpents. If Shiva and Brahma are within Vishnu, what does that mean?
Vishnu is the source of Brahma and Shiva.
That's right. I don't want to see a dog or a cat. I want to see Krishna, who made all of that. I don't want to just love a dog or a cat. I want to love Krishna, who made all of that. It's a nursery rhyme for Hare Krishna kids. O Lord of the universe, O universal form, I see in your body many, many arms, bellies, mouths, and eyes expanded everywhere without limit. I see in you no end, no middle, and no beginning. Interesting, Krishna said, I'm the beginning, middle, and end of things. Now Arjuna is saying, I see. Krishna said, of the Adityas, of the Maruts, of the this, of the that. And now Arjuna is saying, I see all these things. Everything, not everything, but many of the things which were said in the 10th chapter, theoretically, are now experienced directly. Krishna says, I'm going to show you this. Then it says, Krishna showed him this. Now Arjuna is saying, I saw this. You understand how it's flowing? So there's some repetition there, but what it really is Krishna says, I'm going to show you this. Then Sanjaya says, Arjuna saw all of that. And Arjuna says, I just saw all of that. So you're getting this triple confirmation. One of my favorite grapplers on the planet, his name's Gordon Ryan. Not the smartest. Not the smartest, guy in the room, but he's a brilliant grappler. And what he started doing recently, before he retired, is he said that he started calling out the exact ways in which he was going to submit people in tournaments. Then he would toy with them like a cat toys with a rat for 10, 15 minutes to make it fun, and then submit them with the exact move he said, but he kept the move in a letter, like sealed, and the announcers would open it up at the end of the match and read, and it would be exactly what he said he was going to get. How crazy is that? Who does that, right? Shows such a high level. Shows such a high level of advancement beyond one's opponent. You follow? And so you get a little bit of that here. It's like Krishna says, I'm going to show you this. And then Sanjay says, he showed him that. And Arjuna goes, I just saw that. You're getting like this triple confirmation. It shows, like a mastery over reality on the part of Krishna. Does that make sense? All right. Your form, which is difficult to see because it's glaring effulgence, like thousand suns rising in the sky at once, spreading on all sides like blazing fire or the immeasurable radiance of the sun. Yet I see this glowing form everywhere adorned with various crowns, clubs, and discs. Those are the symbols of Vishnu. You are the supreme primal objective. You're the ultimate resting place of the universe. You're inexhaustible. You're the oldest. You're the maintainer of eternal religion, the personality of Godhead. This is my opinion. That's far out. We could spend a whole couple of hours on all these terms. Akshara, the undecaying, and Avyaya, the inexhaustible, Dharma Gopta, the protector of Dharma. Does that make sense? Just like, you know what I mean? Paramam Veditavyam, the supreme thing that's to be known, the supreme knowable object, the one thing that if you know it, you know everything. It's a far-out idea. It's only there in theology, that if you know one thing, you know everything. It's the promise of theology, that you can know the source of all creation and thereby, through that source, through that grace, know everything. Not necessarily that you become omniscient or that you'll necessarily know every single detail of the universe, but that through that source that's munificent, everything you need to know will be shown to you. Even if you discover the primal laws of physics, it won't give you that. There's a conscious person on the other side of that equation that then gifts you the understanding of each thing in life and allows you to navigate through life with grace and poise and mastery, no matter what life throws at you. So anyway, we could spend a whole class on that verse. This Arjuna's prayers are beautiful. Really, in a lot of ways, our scriptures are selections of prayers by great devotees who are experiencing transcendence, strung together by a storyline to keep your attention. And so for a lot of people, the storyline is more exciting and sexy because there's intrigue and there's romance and there's betrayal and all sorts of fun stuff like you get in a good movie. I mean, the Mahabharata is as sexy as any novel or movie ever made. It's like Game of Thrones times 1,000,000. There's so much intrigue, court intrigue and reversal and this and that and everything. But that's for super materialistic people. They'll be attracted to that. For advanced spiritualists, the verses of prayers of great devotees experiencing God become the sweetest parts of the scripture. And they can't wait to get past the romance and drama and intrigue to these sections where they can dive into spirituality. And through the experiences of our great teachers in the days of yore, begin to dip our feet, dip our heads into that sacred water and immerse ourselves in it and start to have our own experience of divinity. Do you guys follow that? You are without origin, middle, or end. He's repeating himself. Why? Because he's undergoing ecstatic experiences. So if he does repeat himself a bit, it's not a problem. Sometimes, like Krishna says, I'm going to do this, and just says he did it, and Arjuna says, I see it. But then sometimes Arjuna falters over himself because he's undergoing an ecstatic, transformative experience. Your glory is unlimited. You have numberless arms, and the sun and the moon are your eyes. What a beautiful meditation. I see you with blazing fire coming forth from your mouth, burning the entire universe by your own radiance. That's a little scary. There's a little foreshadowing going on there. Blazing fire coming from your mouth, burning the whole creation. Well, ultimately, the creation is destroyed. And even the sun's ultimately going to explode and burn us all to smithereens. And so it goes supernova or something like that, right? And so we're going to, maybe it doesn't. I think maybe the sun's too small to go supernova. Does it? Nobody knows? I don't know either.
It's going to expand and shrink.
Yeah. It's not going to go supernova. It might expand and kill us all,
Yeah.
but then it'll shrink. But it won't go supernova and form galaxies. It's not a big enough star. So, this idea that if you want to make sense out of the universe, you have to make sense out of death, destruction, exploding stars, and everything else, and see the beauty in that. So Arjuna's just starting to grapple with that a little bit. God is entropy. Krishna said previously, I'm death. Mrityu sarva haraschaham. I'm death, which takes everything away. Although you're one, you spread throughout the sky and the planets and all space in between. O Great One, seeing this wondrous and terrible form, all the planetary systems are perturbed. It's powerful, and that powerful is scary because it means you're not in control. The whole and all space in between, that's kind of cool. It shows a real complete conception of divinity. All the hosts of demigods are surrendering before you and entering into you through death, through liberation. Some of them, very much afraid, are offering you prayers with folded palms, a fear-based conception of God. Hosts of great sages, perfected beings, are crying all peace, so they're not so afraid. They've reconciled it. A fear-based conception, more of a settled conception where you're no longer afraid of it, you've accepted it. They're praying to you by singing the Vedic hymns. The Vedic hymns are ultimately the visions of great sages who are experiencing the divine form and then chanting about it, and that becomes our scriptural revelatory tradition. Did you follow that? All the various manifestations of the Lord Shiva, the Adityas, the Vasus, the Sadhyas, the Vishvadevas, the two Ashwis, the Maruts, the forefathers, the Gandharvas, the Yakshas, the Asuras, and the perfected demigods are beholding you in wonder. Again, it's like amongst the Asuras, I'm Prahlad. Amongst the Gandharvas, I'm Chitrarata, etc., etc. So Krishna's amongst the Devas, I'm Indra. Krishna said all this before, and so now Arjuna is mentioning all these different categories. Amongst the Yakshas, I'm Kubera. And so Krishna's likening himself to all these. O mighty armed one. Like Arjuna's been calling, Krishna's been calling Arjuna mighty armed. Now Arjuna's like, you're the real mighty armed one with unlimited arms, doing unlimited things. O mighty armed one, all the planets of the demigods are disturbed at seeing your great form with its many faces, eyes, arms, thighs, legs, and bellies, and your many terrible teeth, and they're disturbed, and so am I. O all-pervading Vishnu, seeing you with your many radiant colors touching the sky, your gaping mouths, your great glowing eyes, my mind is perturbed by fear. I can no longer maintain my steadiness or equilibrium of mind. Here's the shift from the Vishvarupa to the Kala Rupa, from Krishna being seen as this beautiful form to Krishna being seen as this terrifying form. O Lord of Lords, O refuge of the worlds, please be gracious to me. I cannot keep my balance seeing your blazing, death-like faces and awful teeth In all directions I'm bewildered. All the sons of Dhritarashtra, Arjuna's siblings, his cousins and brothers, along with their allied kings and Bhishma, Drona, Karna, and our chief soldiers too. They're rushing into your fearful mouths. And some I see trapped with heads smashed between your teeth. The heads are like little morsels of food in between the teeth. Imagine that, right? Multiple heads in between Krishna's teeth. That's the vision now. Because it's death. Krishna's death as much as he's life. He's the beginning, middle, and end of all things. You have to reconcile that if you want to have the universal vision. And it's tough. As the many, many waves of rivers flow into the ocean, so do all these great warriors enter blazing into your mouths, flowing like water. Or for the foolish ones, I see all people rushing full speed into your mouths as moths dash to destruction in a blazing fire. That's for the impious, moth-like materialists. The waves flow with Krishna, like a kitten being held by a cat, and it's being pulled up by the nape of their neck, as opposed to the impious people who are like moths rushing into a fire to their destruction. Same jaws, same cat, but a rat feels those jaws to be like death as opposed to their mother taking them home. That's Prabhupada's example. O Vishnu. He calls him Vishnu, indicating Vishnu is superior to both Brahma and Shiva. I see you devouring all people from all sides with your flaming mouths, covering all the universe with your effulgence. You are manifest with terrible scorching rays. O Lord of Lords, so fierce of form, please tell me who you are. I offer my obeisance to you. Please be gracious to me. You're the primal Lord. I want to know about you, for I do not know what your mission is. It's too much. The death, the life, everything all together. I don't get it. And then Krishna now speaks. Arjuna's prayers are over. Krishna speaks. Time I am, the great destroyer of the world. And I've come here to destroy all people. With the exception of you, all the soldiers here on both sides will be slain. Kalo asmi lokakshaya krit pravridham. Lokam samahartum iha pravritaha. Time I am, the great destroyer of the world. And I am here to kill, to destroy everything. Except for you and your brothers. All the warriors on both sides are going to die. Indicating determinism. Therefore, get up. Tasmat tvam utishta yasho labhasva. Bumsharajam samridam aivaite nyatam sapurvameva. Nimitta matram bhavasavya sachin. Therefore, get up, prepare to fight, win glory, conquer your enemies, enjoy a flourishing kingdom. They're already put to death by my arrangement, and you, O Savya Sachi, can be but an instrument in the fight. Of course, there is no determinism, because Arjuna has been given the choice. By Krishna instructing Arjuna to do this, he's indicating that Arjuna has the free will to choose. But not everything. Some things are determined. That's perfectly consistent with an all-good, all-powerful deity. That some things would be predetermined, but free will would be completely nullified. It's perfectly consistent with an all-good, all-powerful deity. We can defend this idea without referencing the scripture. They can reference the scripture and try to critique us, and we can defend the idea. The opposite of what I encountered today with this feeble-minded Christian pseudo-theologian. And Krishna reveals his hand. This is the verse that was spoken by Oppenheimer when the first nuclear bomb exploded at the Trinity test site. Interesting enough, called the Trinity test site. named after the Trinity of Christianity. And so this was the Manhattan experiment come to fruition. The first hydrogen bomb exploded, and Oppenheimer quoted this verse in Sanskrit. He was reminded of it when he saw the first mushroom cloud, the plume come up, the incredible, awesome, destructive power. He followed the Gita whenever you see something. Yad yad vibhuti mat sattvam shrimadurjitam evava. He's followed that. Mama tejang sasambhavan. That it comes from a spark of my splendor. He followed that. And so we get to a natural break in the text. Thank you all so very much for joining us on Instagram.